Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode, dear lovely IELTS candidates. Well, today we're going to cover another task to IELTS essay, and we're going to write a sample band 9 answer to this question. So first of all, let's take a look at our question. Let's see what the question is about. And of course, it is one of those compelling, let's say, questions that has appeared in IELTS test. Now, this is our question. There is a moral necessity today for the richer countries of the world to help the poorer countries develop in terms of feeding the population, education, and health care. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? Right. Well, first of all, we know that this is a agree-disagree type of question. And in agree-disagree question, as we worked before, you have different structures. The first one is that you totally agree with the question. You totally or completely agree with the question. And in this case, you have to mention your view in your thesis statement, which is the last sentence in your introduction. Another way is to totally or completely disagree with the question. And sometimes you can have a partial opinion. You agree with the question. However, in the third paragraph or the second body paragraph, you have to write about the opposing view, the different view, right? And on the other hand, you can disagree with the question, and in the second body paragraph, you can also write why and how you can agree with this statement, the opposing view, right? So these are the ways that we can organize and write our essay. All right. And as you know, there are 4 paragraphs, and the first paragraph is our introduction. So basically, you know that in the introduction, we start from writing our general statement. After the general statement, we paraphrase the question, right? And the last sentence, which is the most important sentence throughout your whole essay, is thesis statement. In the thesis statement, we have worked before. We've worked a lot on how to write our thesis statement. In your thesis statement, you should say if you agree with this sentence or not, right? Now, let's start writing our introduction paragraph. So we start with writing a general statement that kind of related to the question. So the question is about helping poorer countries, and there is a moral necessity, right, for richer countries to help poorer countries. Now we can start writing our general statement with something like this. The world today is often divided into 2 categories: more developed and less developed countries. So we're kind of referring to the question, right? Poor countries and rich countries, developed countries, less developed countries. This division is significant in terms of health, wealth, and education. Now, after this, we should paraphrase the question and then come up with a thesis statement. To minimize this gap, it is argued that richer countries are morally responsible to support the less wealthy. So morally responsible. In the question, we had the word moral necessity. However, we change it here into morally responsible. All right? Morally responsible. And in the question, we had poorer countries, and in our introduction, we have less wealthy. As you can see how I change the words, how I use some synonym language here in writing my introduction, and of course, paraphrasing the question. Now, this is the most important sentence throughout my whole essay, and that is my thesis statement. Now, I write something like this. I personally feel that the prosperous countries are obligated and expected to contribute to the development of countries with weaker economies. Now, what I mention here, what I've written here, is not a very, let's say, total agreement or disagreement with the question. I say I personally feel. So when you say I feel, it means that you do not totally agree or even disagree. All right. So it shows the examiner, all right, that in the third paragraph, in the second body paragraph, I'm going to write about the opposing view, right? Those who do not believe this, all right? Those who think that rich countries are not responsible toward poor countries, all right? So if I wanted to completely agree or disagree, I should have written, I totally agree, or I completely agree that the prosperous countries are obligated, all right? Now, let's turn to our first body paragraph. In the first body paragraph, we have to write the reasons why we believe that rich countries should help or contribute to the welfare of poor countries. Why? What are our reasons? We can write 2 or 3 reasons for our argument, all right? Now, the first sentence in our body paragraph, as you know, is the topic sentence. So the topic sentence is kind of, you should write about your reason, the reason behind that. For example, to address this argument, the history of the wealthy countries is relevant. So we are referring to the history of, let's say, wealthy countries. Many less developed countries are former colonies. Therefore, the wealthy countries had a historical impact on the less wealthy. So here, I do mean that if those countries are wealthy now, they're wealthy because of the poor countries that they were their colonies, right? I repeat this again. Many less developed countries are former colonies. Therefore, the wealthy countries had a historical impact on the less wealthy. Now, I should conclude this. Thus, or I can write therefore, richer countries' economies were dependent on the currently less developed countries for their rich status. Thus, richer countries' economies were dependent on the currently less developed countries for their rich status. Now, this is our first reason. This is our first argument toward this. Now, I should add another reason for this. Now, we should use some connectives, right, in order for our writing to have coherence and cohesion. And that is the word furthermore, or we can also write moreover, or in addition, or additionally. These are the words that we can use instead of furthermore. Even today, the wealthy countries contribute to the wealth inequality by exploiting the inhabitants of less developed countries. Listen again. Furthermore, even today, the wealthy countries contribute to the wealth inequality by exploiting the inhabitants of less developed countries, giving workers lower wages than people within their own countries. So this is another reason that I believe that rich countries should help and contribute to poor countries, because they're exploiting the workers. They're giving them less wages. They're giving them less salary, right? Now, what is the conclusion of this, right? Due to this dependence on poorer countries and the influence that the richer countries have had on the imbalance, it can be concluded that richer countries are indeed morally obliged to help the less wealthy countries. Now, this is my conclusion here in this paragraph. And I say that because of this dependence on poorer countries and because rich countries are exploiting the inhabitants of the less developed countries, so rich countries are morally obliged to help poor countries or less wealthy countries. Now, this is my first body paragraph. Now, after this, because in the thesis statement we did not totally or completely agree with this question, now we have to write about those people who believe that rich countries are not responsible to the welfare of poor countries. Now, what are their reasons? We can write two or maybe three reasons, but remember something. Because we think, and because I personally think that rich countries should help, now this paragraph, this second body paragraph should be shorter than the previous paragraph, right? Because we side with the previous paragraph. We root for the previous paragraph. Now let's listen. Opposing this is the view that each country is in charge of their own inhabitants and that therefore they need to provide health, education, and basic necessities for themselves. So this is the opposing view. And this view is that each country is in charge of their own inhabitants, so they should not expect rich countries to help them, right? Another reason, in addition, simply providing these three services would not lead to closing the wealth gap. It would rather be helpful to invest sustainably in poorer countries and help them create their own systems, allowing these countries to be self-sufficient. So this is another reason, and it's that if rich countries are to contribute to poor countries, they should not give them money. They should kind of invest in those countries. And those countries should take advantage of this investment, of this incentive, and they should help create their own systems, right? So rich countries should not just give them money. They should kind of invest in those countries. And those countries should at last be able to take advantage of these systems and grow their economy, right? Now it's time to write our conclusion. And as you know, conclusion paragraph and the first sentence of the conclusion paragraph is restatement of thesis statement. So what we said in the thesis statement, we should restate here, and we can also use our reasons that we provided, let's say, in the two body paragraphs, and we can also not use them. It's up to you, right? For example, in conclusion, while there is a moral necessity for wealthy countries to aid the poorer ones, simply providing basic necessities is not sufficient. So as you can see, the first one, while there is a moral necessity for wealthy countries to aid the poorer ones, this refers to first body paragraph. As I said, they're morally responsible because of these reasons. Now, simply providing basic necessities is not sufficient. This is the second body paragraph. All right? Now, we could summarize this part by talking about the reasons that we provided in the first body paragraph. And we could also just wrap it up and talk about the moral necessity of rich countries, right? That's it. Now, in the last sentence of the conclusion, as you know, we can provide some suggestions or recommendation or prediction about the future or alternative ways. Now, what I'm going to do here is to provide, let's say, another idea or an alternative idea. A more sustainable idea would be to teach countries to plan and provide for themselves by giving economic incentives. Now, this is a kind of suggestion and at the same time providing an alternative idea that rich countries can provide to, let's say, less developed or poor countries in order to improve their economies. All right. That's it today, guys, for writing our Band 9 model answer for Task 2 essay. And I hope this has been really helpful to you. If you have any questions, you can simply ask in comments, and I will kindly answer all your questions. Until next time, enjoy your time, stay tuned, and goodbye.